Welcome to the D.E.A.D podcast, where I discuss all things spooky and weird. I'm Desi, and today I'll be talking about the Black Dahlia. Let's get started. Hey everyone, how's everyone doing tonight? Hope everyone's doing good. Here it is kind of cold and rainy and gloomy, and it's been like that all day, so I've been pretty lazy all day. And I am drinking tonight. I had one of the wines. I thought they were both new wines. One of the wines is not red, and it was peach flavored, and I took one sip and I was like, nope. So I'm not drinking that. The other one, I realized that I already had it, that I had already tried it, and it was a little dry for me. So I do want to drink it, but I want to find a simple recipe to spruce it up, kind of like a sangria, but I mean, it could be different. I don't know. I don't know how to mix drinks and stuff. So if anyone has any suggestions, let me know. The next thing that I had was the little bottles you can buy and stuff. So I had the Fireball cinnamon whiskey, and so I got that, and I have it with the Coke in my cute little Valentine doggy wine cup. So I will post a picture of that. It's super cute. And my shirt I am wearing tonight is another shirt I got. I believe she gave it to me for my birthday, and it's from my podcast bestie, Chrissy over at Paranormal Misfit Podcast. Check her out. But she got it for me. It has Captain Spaulding's Museum of Monsters and Madmen. Take the murder ride and see the evil surgeon. And it has Captain Spaulding on it. He is creepy, and I know it's from a scary movie, and Chrissy might kill me, but I had to look up what movie he was from. I was like, where is this guy from? And when I looked it up, it was like House of a Thousand Corpses and some other stuff. So don't freak out, Chrissy. I will watch it. It's on Tubi or whatever, so I will watch it either, if not tonight, tomorrow. I'll also let you know what I think. But I'm wearing that cool shirt and I love it. And tonight's episode is, I'm sure most of you have heard of the Black Dahlia, so we're going to get started on that. The 1947 murder of Elizabeth Short, also known as the Black Dahlia, is one of the oldest cold cases in Los Angeles history. In the decades since the Black Dahlia murder, police, the press, and amateur sleuths have all deep dived into this unsolved crime and developed several theories. But before we deep dive into the theories and details about her death, let's talk about her life. Elizabeth Short was born on July 29, 1924, in Hyde Park, Boston, Massachusetts, to Cleo Alvin and Phoebe May Sawyer Short. She was the third of 5 daughters. Her father was a United States Navy sailor and her mother was a housewife. They briefly relocated to Portland, Maine in 1927 before settling in Medford, Massachusetts, a suburb of Boston, that same year. Short's father built miniature golf courses until he lost most of his savings in the 1929 stock market crash. In 1930, his car was found abandoned on the Charleston Bridge, and it was assumed that he had jumped into the Charles River. Believing her husband to be deceased, Short's mother began working as a bookkeeper to support the family. Elizabeth Short suffered from bronchitis and severe asthma attacks and even underwent lung surgery at age 15. After this, her doctors suggested that she relocate during certain climates to prevent more respiratory problems. Her mother sent her away to spend winter with family friends in Miami, Florida for the next 3 years. Short ended up dropping out of Medford High School during her sophomore year. In late 1942, Short's mother received a letter of an apology from her presumed deceased husband, which revealed he was very much alive and had started a whole new life in California. In December, at age 18, Short relocated to Vallejo, California, to live with him. Arguments between Short and her father led to her moving out in January 1943. Short took a job at the base exchange at Camp Cook near Lompoc, briefly living with a U.S. Army Air Force sergeant who reportedly abused her. She ended up leaving Lompoc in mid-1943 and moved to Santa Barbara, where she was arrested on September 23, 1943, for drinking at a local bar while underage. Juvenile authorities sent her back to Massachusetts, but she returned instead to Florida, making only occasional visits to her family near Boston. While she was in Florida, Short met Major Matthew Michael Gordon, Jr., a decorated Army Air Force officer of the 2nd Air Command, who was training for deployment to Southeast Asian theater of World War II. Short later told friends that Gordon had written to propose marriage while he was recovering from injuries from a plane crash in India. She accepted, but Gordon died in a second crash on August 10, 1945. In July 1946, Elizabeth went to Los Angeles to visit an old boyfriend named Joseph Fickling. However, Fickling moved to another state. Elizabeth stayed in hotels and people's homes, never staying anywhere for very long. In December 1946, Elizabeth went to San Diego. On January 8, 1947, a man named Manley, known as Red, offered to drive her to Los Angeles. They spent the night in a motel, but Manley said they did not sleep together. The next day, Thursday, January 9, 1947, Manley took Elizabeth to the Los Angeles bus station where she deposited her luggage. He then went with her to the Biltmore Hotel. He left her there at about 6:30 p.m. Unfortunately, where Elizabeth went after saying goodbye to him and what she did in the next 6 days is a mystery. At some point, Elizabeth met the killer. Her father refused to identify the body of his daughter at the morgue, leaving the task to her poor mother. Again, what a fucking loser. He also refused to attend his daughter's funeral. On January 15th, 1947, Elizabeth Short's body was found in the Los Angeles neighborhood, Leimert Park. Betty Bersinger, a local housewife, was walking down Norton Avenue with her 2-year-old daughter in Los Angeles when she saw something disturbing in an empty lot on the street. When she first saw the body, she thought it was a mannequin. Guys, it's never ever ever a mannequin. Never. She soon realized that the body was a corpse and grabbed her daughter and ran to the nearest phone to call the police. Elizabeth Short's body had been cut in half at the waist, which this is the only spot where the body can be severed in half without breaking bone, and her blood was completely drained out of her body, which suggested that she had been killed elsewhere and cleaned before being positioned there. Her face had been cut from the corners of her mouth to her ears, creating what is known as a Glasgow smile or the Joker smile. It was reported that she was likely alive when she was attacked. There was a bluish discoloration around the Glasgow smile, which suggested she was alive at the time. The lower half of her body was positioned a foot away from the upper, and some of her organs, such as her intestines, had been removed and neatly placed underneath her buttocks. Her uterus was completely removed. Pieces of flesh had been cut away from her thighs and breasts, where entire portions of flesh had been sliced away. The corpse had been posed with her hands over her head, her elbow bent at right angles, and her legs spread apart. And her stomach was full of feces, leading some to believe that she had been forced to eat them before she was killed. Near her body, detectives noted a heel print and a cement sack with traces of blood that had presumably been used to transport her body to the vacant lot. An autopsy was performed on Short's body on January 16th, 1947, that stated that Short was 5 feet and 5 inches tall, weighed 115 pounds, and had light blue eyes, brown hair, and badly decayed teeth. There were ligature marks on her ankles, wrists, and neck, and an irregular laceration with superficial tissue loss on her right breast. It also noted superficial lacerations on the right forearm, left upper arm, and the lower left side of the chest. The body had been entirely cut in half by a technique taught in the 1930s called a hemicorporectomy. Little bruising along the incision line suggested it had been performed after death, and her official cause of death was cerebral hemorrhage and shock. The LAPD reached out to the FBI to help identify the body by searching their fingerprint database. Short's fingerprints turned up rather quickly because she had applied for a job as a clerk at the commissary of the U.S. Army's camp back in California in 1943. And then her prints turned up a second time since she had been arrested by the Santa Barbara Police Department for underage drinking, which was just 7 months after she had applied to the job. Meanwhile, Elizabeth Short's mother, Phoebe Short, didn't learn of her daughter's death until reporters from the Los Angeles Examiner telephoned her pretending that Elizabeth had won a beauty contest. They pumped her for all the details they could get on Elizabeth before revealing the truth. What fucking losers. Who fucking does that? The FBI also had her mugshot from her arrest, which they provided to the press. Eventually, some details about Elizabeth were uncovered. She moved to LA in July 1946. She worked as a waitress, and she struggled to get acting roles in Hollywood, and she lived in a rented room behind the Florentine Gardens nightclub on Hollywood Boulevard. As the media learned more about her history, they began to brand her as a sexual deviant. One police report read, "This victim knew at least 50 men at the time of her death, and at least 25 men had been seen with her in the 60 days before her death." She was known as a teaser of men. Newspapers started referring to her as the Black Dahlia, which was a play on words of the popular movie at the time called The Blue Dahlia, and her striking dyed black hair and black clothing she wore. The story of the Black Dahlia made headlines for weeks. Even though the case was famous, authorities had an extremely difficult time figuring out who was behind it. But about a week after the body was found on January 21st, the Examiner received a call from a person claiming to be the murderer who said he would be sending Short's belongings in the mail as proof of his claim. On January 24th, 1947, a suspicious manila envelope addressed to the Los Angeles Examiner and other LA papers was discovered. The envelope included a letter using cutout words from newspaper clippings that said, "Here is Dahlia's belongings." Inside the envelope were Short's birth certificate, business cards, photographs, names written on pieces of paper, and an address book. All of the contents of the envelope had been cleaned with gasoline, similar to how Short's body had been cleaned. This led authorities to believe that the letter was definitely from Short's killer. On January 26th, another letter arrived. This handwritten note read, "Here it is, turning in Wednesday, January 29th at 10 a.m. Had my fun at police, Black Dahlia Avenger." The letter included a location. Police waited at the appointed time and place, but the author never showed. Afterwards, the alleged killer sent a note made of letters cut up and pasted from magazines to the Examiner that said, quote, "Have changed my mind. You would not give me a square deal. Dahlia killing was justified." End quote. Yet again, everything sent by the person had been wiped clean with gasoline, so they could not lift any fingerprints from them. Police contacted approximately 75 men from Short's address book, but the majority of the men claimed to have only known Short briefly. Due to the nature of the precision cuts on Short's body, authorities suspected someone in the medical field could be the killer. At least 750 investigators from the LAPD and other police departments were put on the case. More than 60 people, including some women, confessed to the murder, especially after a reward of $10,000 for information about the case was posted. Exhaustive leads were followed, locations all over Los Angeles were searched, and hundreds of interviews were conducted. When they hit a dead end in LA, police tried to make a connection with crimes in other cities, like the Cleveland torso murderer, another unapprehended serial killer that dismembered victims between 1934 and 1938 in Cleveland. The murder of Jean French in LA on February 10, 1947, has also been discussed as possibly linked to Short's murder. As time went on and the case went cold, a lot of people began to assume that the Black Dahlia murder was a date gone wrong or that Short met a dangerous stranger late at night while walking alone. It has been 77 years since Elizabeth Short's body was discovered and remains unsolved. However, in the recent years, a few riveting theories have come to light. Now I'm going to be talking about the different suspects. There was a lot of them. A lot of them were kind of like maybe him, then he was dismissed shortly, but I decided to pick three of the most, like, I guess, kind of more in-depth ones. Shortly after Elizabeth Short's body was discovered on January 15th, 1947, police tracked down the last person believed to have seen her alive, a married redhead pipe clamp salesman named Robert "Red" Manley. As Manley told police, he first met Short in 1946 when he struck up a conversation with her on a street corner. Quote, "I asked her if she wanted a ride. She turned her head and wouldn't look at me," he said in a 1947 interview reported by the LA Times. Quote, "Finally, she turned around and asked me if I didn't think it was wrong to ask a girl on a corner to get into my car." End quote. That was the start of their relationship, and when Short needed a place to stay after the holidays, she sent Manley a message to pick her up. Manley and Short stayed in a hotel together. He claimed they did not sleep together, and then Manley drove her to Los Angeles. According to the LA Times, Short had lied and said she was meeting her sister at the Biltmore Hotel, when her sister had not shown up by 6:30 p.m. on January 9th. Manley left Short at the hotel to go home to his family. Though police considered him a Black Dahlia suspect, Manley passed a polygraph test. Yet, he spent the rest of his life struggling with his mental health. The LA Times reported that his wife had him committed in 1954 because he was hearing voices. That same year, doctors gave Manley sodium pentothal, which can allegedly make people more truthful, and asked him about the Black Dahlia case. Manley stuck to his story. Robert Manley died on January 9th, 1986, exactly 39 years after he left Elizabeth Short at the Biltmore. Now on to suspect number 2. Shortly after his father's death in 1999, now retired LAPD detective Steve Hodel was going through his dad's belongings when he noticed two photos of a woman who bore a striking resemblance to Elizabeth Short. After finding the chilling images, Hodel began to use his policeman skills to investigate his own deceased father. He went through newspaper archives and witness interviews from the case, and even filed a Freedom of Information Act to obtain FBI files on the Black Dahlia murder. He also had a handwriting expert compare samples of his father's writing to the writing on some of the notes sent to the press from the alleged killer. The analysis found a strong possibility that his father's handwriting matched, but the results were not conclusive. On a more gruesome side, the Black Dahlia crime scene photos showed that Short's body had been cut in a manner consistent with a hemicorporectomy, which is a medical procedure that slices the body beneath the lumbar spine. Hodell's father had been a doctor who attended medical school when this procedure was being taught in the 1930s. Additionally, Hodel searched his father's archives at UCLA, finding a folder full of receipts for contracting work on his childhood home. In that folder, there was a receipt dated a few years before the murder for a large bag of concrete, the same size and brand as the concrete bag found near Elizabeth's body. Even though, by the time Hodel had begun his investigation, many of the police officers were dead, he was able to carefully reconstruct the conversations the officers had about the case. He eventually gathered enough evidence to write a book in 2003 called Black Dahlia Avenger: The True Story. While fact-checking the book, LA Times columnist Steve Lopez requested police files from the case and made a chilling discovery. Shortly after the murder, LAPD had 6 main suspects, and George Hodel was on their list. He was such an important suspect that his home was bugged in 1950. Most of the audio was harmless, but one chilling conversation stuck out. Quote, "At 8:25 p.m., woman screamed. Woman screamed again. It should be noted the woman not heard before the scream. Later that day, George Hodel was overheard telling someone, quote, 'Realized there was nothing I could do. Put a pillow over her head and covered her with a blanket. Get a taxi. Expired 12:59. They thought there was something fishy. Anyway, now they may have figured it out. Killed her. Supposed I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead." End quote. Even after this shocking revelation, which seems to support that George Hodel killed Short and possibly also his secretary, the Black Dahlia case still has not been officially closed. However, this hasn't stopped Steve Hodel from investigating his father. He said he also found details from dozens of other murders that could possibly connect his father, implicating him not only as a Black Dahlia murderer, but also as a deranged serial killer. Hodel's research has even garnered some attention from law enforcement. In 2004, Stephen R. Kay, the head deputy for LA County's District Attorney's Office, said that if George Hodel was still alive, he would have enough to indict him for Elizabeth Short's murder. Now, the third suspects, we'll see. There's a lot of people involved in this next story. Another suspect in the Black Dahlia case is Leslie Dillon. In 2017, British author Pugh Eatwell announced she had solved the cold case and published her findings in a book called Black Dahlia, Red Rose: The Crime, Corruption, and Cover-Up of America's Greatest Unsolved Murder. The real murderer, she claimed, was Leslie Dillon, a man who police briefly considered the primary suspect but ultimately let go. However, she also claimed that there was much more to the case besides the killer himself. According to Eatwell, Dillon, who worked as a bellhop, murdered Short at the request of Mark Hansen, a local nightclub and movie theater owner who worked with Dillon. Hansen was another suspect that had eventually been let go, and the owner of the address book that had been mailed to the Examiner. He later claimed that he gave the address book to Short as a gift. Short had reportedly stayed with Hansen a few nights, and he was one of the last people reported to have spoken with her before her death in a phone call on January 8th. Eatwell alleges that Hansen was obsessed with Short and came on to her, though she refused his advances. Then he apparently called Leslie Dillon to, quote, take care of her. Hansen, it seemed, knew Dillon was capable of murder, but didn't realize just how deranged he really was. Previously, Leslie Dillon had worked as a mortician's assistant, where he could have potentially learned how to bleed a body dry. Eatwell also discovered from police records that Dillon knew details about the crime that had not yet been released to the public. One detail was that Short had a tattoo of a rose on her thigh. For his part, Dillon claimed to be an aspiring crime writer and told authorities that he was writing a book about the Black Dahlia case, which never materialized. Despite all the evidence pointing to him, Dillon was never charged with the crime. Eatwell claims he was released due to Mark Hansen's ties to some of the cops at the LAPD. While Eatwell believes the department was corrupt to begin with, she also thinks that Hansen contributed largely to its corruption by exploiting his ties to certain officers. Another discovery that lent itself to Eatwell's theory was a crime scene found at a local motel. During her research, Eatwell came across a report by Astor Motel owner Henry Hoffman. The Astor Motel was a small, 10-cabin facility near the University of Southern California. On the morning of January 15th, 1947, he opened the door to one of his cabins and found the room covered in blood and fecal matter. In another cabin, he discovered that someone had left a bundle of women's clothing wrapped up in brown paper, which was also stained in blood. Instead of reporting the crime, Hoffman simply cleaned it up. What a fucking idiot. He had been arrested 4 days earlier for beating his wife and didn't want to risk another run-in with the police. Eatwell believes that the motel is where Elizabeth Short was murdered. Eyewitness reports, though uncorroborated, claim that a woman who resembled Short was seen at the motel shortly before the murder. Eatwell's theories have not been proven, as everyone involved with the original Black Dahlia murder case is most likely dead by now, and many official LAPD documents remain locked away in vaults. However, Eatwell remains confident in her findings and truly believes that she has solved the mysterious and gruesome case of the Black Dahlia murder. Okay, now we are going to get to the haunted factor, and this is about the Biltmore Hotel, which is supposedly the last place that Elizabeth Short was seen alive. The City of Angels is home to some of the creepiest hotels with reputations of paranormal activity. Nestled in the heart of downtown LA, the Biltmore is one of the most iconic of these Hollywood haunts, thanks to its architectural character, history, and impressive size. The 70,000 square foot Art Deco marvel features Spanish and Italian Renaissance styles and Moorish detailing throughout, complete with lavish, high-beamed, and coffered ceilings. Until the mid-20th century, the Biltmore was considered LA's most elegant hotel. In fact, it hosted the Academy Awards in the 1930s and 40s, and was also a popular destination for young Hollywood hopefuls, including murder victim Elizabeth Short, also known as the Black Dahlia. Short was known to frequent the hotel with friends and also took Spanish lessons in the lobby, but most notably, it was potentially the last place she was ever seen alive on January 9th, 1947. She had asked a new acquaintance, Red Manley, to drive her from San Diego, where she had been staying for the final month of her life, to the bus station in downtown LA. When he wasn't comfortable dropping her off there alone, She requested he take her to the Biltmore Hotel, where she told him that she would be meeting her older sister Virginia. Elizabeth never planned on meeting her sister there. Manley tried to locate Virginia in the lobby until he left Elizabeth alone there at 6:30 p.m. to go home. Hotel staff saw Elizabeth making phone calls in the lobby that evening, but investigators never determined who she was trying to reach. The employees confirmed that they observed her alone and saw her get up and leave as if she were signaled by someone outside around 10 p.m. The bell captain opened the door for Elizabeth as she exited the hotel alone and walked down south into the fog. Her mutilated remains were discovered a few miles south in an abandoned lot in Leimert Park 6 days later, on January 15, 1947, and her gruesome murder remains unsolved. In the many decades since, Elizabeth's ghost has frequently been spotted in the Biltmore. Guests reported seeing a pale woman with dark hair, a sheer black or gray 1940s style dress. She is usually spotted entering or leaving rooms on the 10th or 11th floors, or wandering the halls. Author Ginny Myers Sane accidentally caught a hair-raising snap of a spirit in a selfie she snapped for her son. Several TripAdvisor commenters have also reported cases of paranormal activity, from one guest who woke up with a figure hovering over her in the middle of the night, to a couple claiming to hear voices with 1940s transatlantic accents in the room over, which was empty at the time. On top of that, bartenders have reported apparitions passing behind them on a daily basis. Whether it is Elizabeth's ghost or someone else's spirit haunting the Biltmore, we will never know for sure. Also, whether Elizabeth was seen alive and well after she left the Biltmore Hotel remains a highly debated subject among journalists and researchers today. So that is the episode, guys. That is the life and the death and the horrible murder of Elizabeth Short, or the Black Dahlia, and the supposed hauntings of her at the Biltmore Hotel. Now, let me know what you think about all this. Do you think it really is her spirit? Do you think she was last seen there? Have you done any deep dives into this case? Do you have any other theories? I remember watching the movie. Josh Hartnett, Scarlett Johansson, Aaron Eckhart, Hilary Swank. Yeah, it has a lot of good actors in it. I remember watching it when it came out. In 2006, I was like 16. Was I watching that at that time? Probably was. Because I'm crazy. I was probably watching it. Yeah, I didn't get to rewatch it. But I remember that was the first I remember hearing about her and researching a little bit about her. I didn't know about like the supposed hauntings or sightings of her at the Biltmore Hotel. So I also wanted to like look into that, and so I thought that would kind of like tie in nicely. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you knew about her, if you didn't know about her. That brings me to the end of this episode. Thanks for listening to the D.E.A.D podcast. Please follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at the D.E.A.D podcast. Also, feel free to send in your stories, episode suggestions, or feedback at the deadpodcast1@gmail.com, or send me a DM on Instagram. If you enjoyed this show, please rate and review the podcast on whatever platform you are listening on, and be sure to come back next week for my next episode.